Welcome to the Millionaire University podcast. I'm your host, Brien Gearin, with you today, and we are joined by my new friend, Neel Parekh. He is the owner of the MaidThis Franchise, a residential cleaning and Airbnb cleaning company out in Los Angeles, California. And guys, a really cool part of his story, he's been doing this as a digital nomad for the past 7 years. Neel, I understand you're recently back in LA, but you traveled to 55 countries. So you built a remote cleaning business while traveling the world. Such a cool story. And you're also the host of your own podcast, the Freedom Formula Podcast. Neel, I'm going to shut up and welcome you in here. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for the warm welcome, Brian. Excited to be here, man.
Yeah, I'm super excited because I think it's such a cool industry to be in. Maybe it's kind of a burgeoning industry, but you were at the crack of this back in 2015 when you started this up. So we want to learn all about your business today. We want to talk about the nuts and the bolts, how you got into it, how you made your first sale, how you scaled it, how you handled a team, what your margins look like, everything that we can digest today. We want to hear it. But let's start right at the top. How did you get into this? What's your story and how did MaidThis come to be?
Yeah, sure. So I started right after college and what everyone wants you to do, right? Like a nice, secure job. So I worked in private equity for a few years and I was in the LA corporate grind. Get in, you're in a cubicle, clock out at nighttime, it's dark outside, you go back home, you repeat the next day, next day, next day. And that's kind of how it always was for me. My parents were immigrants here. So all they wanted for my sister and I was just to have a nice, stable career. And Brent, I remember at that job, I maybe a year in, there was a guy there named Partner Paul. I'll call him Partner Paul. He was like 52 years old, and I remember he was set to retire. And someone came to me and said, "Yo, Partner Paul has $20 million in the bank. He's set." And I remember thinking, "Oh my God, this guy's like made it. He's achieved the American dream. This is freaking awesome." The crazy part is, 9 months after that, after Partner Paul's retirement, he had a heart attack and passed away. And for me, that had like a light bulb, like, oh my God, I got to get out of here. I can't just wait 30 years in a cubicle and finally retire later on and hope that I could live that long. So I decided to start a side hustle. And I did a bunch of stuff, Brian, which flopped. Back then it was like drop shipping, there was like micro blogs, there was affiliate sites, like all these types of things which kind of come up at times. So I was trying a bunch of stuff and most of it was just a flop. So the story was I was on Reddit when I was supposed to be working. Brian, do you ever go on Reddit?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Cool. Yeah, I waste a lot of time on Reddit. So I was
Yeah,
on Reddit.
there's a lot of rabbit holes there.
Yeah, a lot of rabbit holes. So I was on Reddit and I was just on one of the top posts on the entrepreneur subreddit was a guy who started a cleaning company. And I was like, okay, what the heck? Let me give this a shot. Nothing else is working. So I started doing it. And the crazy part, it started working. And there's a few reasons in hindsight where I think that worked well versus, some of the more traditional escape the 9 to 5 type businesses, but started working. So I did it for a couple years as a side hustle, eventually quit that job in 2015, booked a one-way flight down to South America and just started traveling.
Wow.
Yeah.
Dang. Okay. So you just booked a one-way flight. You're out of the corporate game. And so you tried a couple side hustles. So that's very common. I did some of that before I got onto mine here.
What was your first side hustle, Brian? It's always a fun question.
Do you know, so like businesses or some homes, they have like flower boxes.
Yeah.
The idea was that we would build out these flower boxes and deliver them. And I got not very far into it before I realized that I don't think this is very scalable.
Yeah.
It was kind of one of those hit you right in the back of the head. And you're like, oh, all right. Yeah, maybe I'll do something else. And then that's when I personally found digital marketing. So I was like, this seems way better.
Yeah. Actually scalable. That's good.
Yeah. Okay. So how did you get into, with the home cleaning, what was kind of like the impetus for this? I know you saw it on Reddit. What was your first step into actually doing the thing? Did you just read a Reddit and you're like, hey, I'm just going to go try this? Like, did you hire someone? Did you go and physically clean the homes? What was it like?
Yeah, it was interesting because like when there's constraints around what you can and can't do with your time, you typically solve problems around it. My constraint was I couldn't physically go anywhere because I was in the office, right? So I think that constraint plus the fact that later on I traveled allowed me to build the business in a remote first way at the beginning. Just because I couldn't be there, then I was traveling.
Right. Yeah. You're one way ticket to South America. You weren't there.
Yeah. Like I'm not going to be able to go there. Right. So I think luckily in hindsight, that made me move a little bit, like operate things a little bit differently. But at the beginning, of course, like no one knows what they're doing. I would have to like look up like, what is hosting? How do I make a website? And my first logo, I remember I straight made on Microsoft Word. So I just typed in made this and then like took a screenshot of it. I'm like, perfect. That's my logo. So just very like, I was able to start with a few $100s just because I was being very scrappy and like didn't really know what I was doing. Eventually, you learn, right? You make a lot of
Hmm.
mistakes and you learn. But the first thing was just going on Craigslist and finding someone who does cleanings. And I remember like I didn't even know how to pay these guys. So after the cleaning jobs, I'd be like, all right, just come outside my corporate building and run outside and hand them cash. And everyone in my corporate building could see me handing cash to people in cars every day. And they're like, you're a drug dealer. You're clearly a drug dealer. So that was my nickname for a couple of years, is just drug dealer. But yeah, it's one of those like, you know how it is, the game at the beginning, you don't know what you're doing. So you're just trying to figure it out as it goes and evolve from there and you stumble and you kind of keep going. So first steps for me to your question, Brian, was just like a website, throwing up a Google ad, praying, and then as things came up, I would try to find more cleaners and go back and forth. And that's pretty much what I did for a couple years.
Okay. So how did you get your first client? Was it through a Google ad? Did you like knock on some door? Well, you weren't there. You couldn't knock on doors. So was it just people that kind of saw what you put out there and they're just like, hey, I need a cleaning. And you're like, sweet, I've got my guy or my gal. They're going in, they're going to do it. What, like, how did that first one go?
Yeah. So the beauty of local services, which I wasn't smart enough to think of this ahead of time, I just happened to stumble into it, is there's always demand. You're not educating the public that cleaning exists. Everyone knows cleaning exists, right? And if you
Hmm.
look at your competition, typically, most of your competition in home services are going to be unsophisticated. Not all, but most. So even I remember back then, I'd call the top 10 competitors on Google, eight of them wouldn't pick up. It'd go to voicemail. The two who did pick up had a terrible sales script and they weren't really doing that well. None of them had an online booking form. It was just very old school.
Hmm.
Oftentimes, I think, especially the cleaning industry, they're probably like 3 or 4 years behind the times when it comes to marketing, tech, things like that. So the people I was competing against just weren't that sophisticated at the time. They weren't doing any of these normal digital marketing things. Most cleaning companies have never heard SEO. They don't know what that is, right?
Hmm.
I didn't know that at the time, so I was just doing like things of what I thought. Like, oh, okay, I guess you throw up a Google ad. Let's see. And I don't even know if it was profitable, but our first sale was from someone who found us on the Google ad and booked online. And dude, I remember how excited I was like at that first dollar. We probably lost money on it. I don't even know. But like I ran outside and again, people could see me. I don't realize they could see me. I'm like dancing outside and it's like a two-way mirror and everyone could see me dancing outside. I was just pumped. But
Yeah.
the first sale was a Google ad. And at the beginning, Yelp was still good. This was a decade ago. So a lot of our business at the beginning would come from Yelp and reviews, referrals, things like that.
Wow. Okay. So, what did it look like as you started winning more business? Was that you just kept running? Well, actually, I want to preface that. Did you teach yourself Google Ads? Like, how did you get into the digital marketing realm, or was it very surface level knowledge? I'll follow a couple tutorials and put it out there.
Super surface level. And this is, I'll preface this and say one thing. I think marketing has gotten more sophisticated as time goes.
Hmm.
Now, I would not recommend like you just throwing up a Google ad and like praying. Like you got a
Right.
landing pages, all that kind of stuff. But back then, it was just like I threw something up and it happened to work. So it
Hmm.
was just researching online, being a little bit scrappy with it.
Okay, I love that. That's yeah, and being back 10 years ago, that was definitely the case compared to today. Way
Yeah.
more expensive now, and you need some sort of chops to get something out there that's worthwhile and not blowing your cash.
Yep.
Okay, so you start getting business. Was the goal always to make this recurring? So like with that first client, did you guys have a system of, hey, can we sign you up and come back next month? Or was it you were just kind of piecemealing along as you were just starting at ground zero?
Yeah, totally piecemealing, man. Like I didn't have any thoughts besides I just want to make some money so I could quit my job and travel
Hmm.
and like help take care of my parents. That's all I wanted. So I wasn't thinking about lifetime value, recurring, anything like that. I was just being as scrappy as I could. And I do things like eventually I figured out that a couple of Airbnb customers would call us, and at first I said no, we don't do Airbnbs, we only do residential. But I realized this is way higher volume, right? It's way stickier because it's a need to have service. It's not like they could say, well, I guess I won't get a cleaning today for my next guest, right? They need the
Hmm.
cleaning. And this was back when a lot of hosts were just, you're leasing a place, you sublease it, you kind of flip it, that type of like hacker type of Airbnb hosts. So we started pivoting towards Airbnb host. And I remember thinking, how do I market to them? These guys are stickier, they're more recurring. And I would do things like go on to Airbnb.com and message them. One account get banned, I'd go to the next one. One account would get banned, I'd go to the next one. So, and finding customers that way, finally referrals would happen and go from there. So I think the Airbnb part is where we actually became a lot more recurring and started to compound the business.
Okay. So and that was kind of the next part I wanted to ask you about was A, how you broke into that. I love the idea of just literally get on Airbnb and start DMing folks and seeing if they need
Mhm.
that service. But with the Airbnb, what was the I guess is this like did that become the majority of your business? Are they just easier to sell to? I know they're easier recurring, but how quickly did that become a big part of your business?
It scaled really quickly because one Airbnb, if you put in perspective, let's say you book a cleaning service, maybe on average a customer will book one time a month, maybe two times, at best weekly, right? At best four times a month. Airbnbs could turn over every 3 days. You could get 10 cleanings from one property, and it's typically just three, let's say 3 day stays, right? So the home hopefully is not going to be crazy dirty, and you can flip them pretty fast. So the volume ends up being a lot more. Now, there's higher stakes involved, right? Like it's B2B, meaning it has to be good and perfect for the next guest, but it's higher volume. So that's like the pros and cons of the Airbnb side. So that's why we decided to focus a little bit more into that one.
How did you find the people that you could trust to do the job the right way? I think this is a huge thing for a lot of people in any line of business is
Mm,
hiring the right people, and especially with you being remote and not
yep.
having cleaned an apartment or a house before. How did you know who to hire? How did you know they did a really? I mean, obviously the client would tell you if they did a good job or not,
Yeah.
but was that a real challenge?
Huge challenge. And I'll be honest, anything in home service, the biggest pain point is going to always be the personnel, the labor, the technicians, right?
Hmm.
It's a human business, which is the beautiful part of it, but also the part where you're gonna have to deal with human problems. Someone told me last week, they said, uh, every person has two problems, and when you start working with them, those problems are now your problems as a business owner.
Hmm.
So it just compounds when you have a very people intensive business. Again, pros and cons of that, right? The pros are people intensive businesses like cleaning. Do you think AI could come in there? Do you think automations could disrupt it? No, it's very insulated. Cleaning business has
Hmm.
been around for a very, very long time. I know people who've had cleaning businesses for 30, 35 years and just have it automated and running, right? You can't say the same for a lot of fast moving tech businesses. The downside is you are dealing with people, right? That's the moat, but that's also the hard part. I would say like we have franchises now, so we have about 30 franchise locations for people who want to start their own remote cleaning company. They have it a lot easier than I did because I could teach them a lot of the things I messed up on. So to your question, Brian, when I was starting, we'd onboard someone and kind of pray they were good. And sometimes you get a complaint and you have to do a refund and just go above and beyond for customer service. If you can't actually be there in person, what can you control? It's typically going to be customer service and software and convenience and things like that, right? So I kind of over indexed on the customer service part as a way of getting beyond that. What I teach our franchisees now is there's a very systematic 5-step process we teach franchisees for how to find and onboard someone and vet them. What I was doing back then is I'd meet them in person and say, okay, you sound great. Like, cool, let's get going. Now there's, a couple rounds of screening, there's a test cleaning, there's a background check, there's things that you can do to get closer to the best product you can before you send someone out there for an actual cleaning.
Absolutely. So, and let's talk about as you started moving down the road with this. Obviously, you're a franchise now, but how did you get to that point where you're like, we need to, where we can franchise this? Beyond people, like, what was the size of your business? How many people did you have on your team, and
Mhm.
what was your top line looking like when you're like, okay, I think it's time to consider franchising?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll walk you through it. So by the time I quit my job, I think we're around like 25 or 30,000 per month in revenue. Quit my job, went to South America. I thought I'd travel for a year, but loved it. So kind of just kept going. So, right, we kept growing as I kept traveling and kept scaling up. And the crazy part is, I remember the first year after I left, when I started working on it full time, the business doubled.
Wow.
And part of it is, you put all of your attention into it. Part of it is just time in the business, things start compounding. But I do know there's typically in cleaning, there's an inflection point, right? The first part's kind of a grind, but then it starts scaling a little bit more rapidly. So we scaled until 2019. We hit almost $2 million in revenue that year. And at that year, my team's fully remote. So I have my sales team in South Africa. It's funny; it's a group of Jehovah's Witnesses down there who have like a really cool South African accent, and they have experienced 2 years of door to door selling. So all my sales call go to them. A team in Latin America who deal with a lot of the cleaners, since a lot of cleaners are Hispanic. So utilizing the globe to service this local location as well. So the team at that point, we're probably around eight, something like that, eight people internally, just to help service the location. And that's when I was thinking about how to expand. And Brian, when you're thinking about expanding, there's a couple of models, which are the blueprints. Get to go with the Starbucks route. Starbucks owns all of their own locations, right? They set up different shops and everything's corporate owned. That was one way I was thinking because we were starting to get a lot of demand in other markets, especially from Airbnb property managers. The other way of expansion would have been the McDonald's route, right? That's franchising. So I decided, hey, let me try out franchising. It's a completely different model, see how it goes, and spend about a year getting it set up and quite a bit of investment to get a franchise business set up. It's not cheap. So finally launched the franchise March 2020, a perfect time to launch a vacation rental cleaning business in time for COVID. So that's when we actually launched the franchise business.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's funny. We had Aaron Harper on a few months ago. He's the owner of Rolling
Yeah, I know
Suds
Aaron.
franchise. Okay, very
Yeah.
cool.
It's a good guy.
Awesome dude. Yeah, great interview as well. And his comment was that franchising is a completely different business. Like he said, the one thing people need to understand is that franchising is a totally 100 million% different business model than the
Mm-hmm.
traditional one. And that's one of the toughest things that, from what I recall, is the toughest thing that business owners got to realize is you got to find someone to help you who can get you into this business mindset. So yeah, right on with
Yeah.
that for sure.
Yeah, Aaron nails. I love like that guy thinks so big. So I love the way that guy thinks, and he's totally right with franchising. I didn't realize it going in. Most people don't really tell you this, but when you're in the franchise world, you have to think: do I want to be a franchisor? Because it's a very different model. Your clients are your franchisees. You're building a coaching and support system for them. The only way to do it is if you're not working full time in your corporate location. That's the only way of doing it. Sometimes people ask me, should I get into franchising? But they love operating their business. They love the expansion. They love the control. In that case, my answer is typically don't do it. Right? It's a
Mhm.
completely different model. I was almost wouldn't think about it as how do I expand my business. I would think about it as how do I start a second business is the best way of thinking about it.
What was your mindset when you got to that inflection point of I have a choice where I can do this? Like why did you choose franchising over just opening multiple locations and having more control?
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, Brian, it was like I wish I could say like, oh, I was so gung ho and so confident and like this is what I knew I wanted to do in my life. It was like a 51%, 49% coin flip. Like honestly, like I was debating with it for a long time. My mindset has always been I'm a lifestyle entrepreneur. Right. I started my business to have the lifestyle I wanted. I wanted time freedom. I wanted location freedom. I wanted to be able to have a scalable business that's sustainable so I could enjoy my life. That was the reason for it. And a big thing in my head was like, damn, if I get involved in franchising, what does that mean for how I'm doing my life? Right. And I think that everyone has different motivations for getting into business. Most people think they want to get into business just for money. But the way I think about it is reverse, right? Think about what ideal lifestyle you want first, then start a business. For example, I have a buddy named Jay. He bought like a power washing company, traditional power washing company, like, trucks, everything like that, crushing it, making tons of money. He hates what he does, right? That's because he bought a business because he looked at the money and now he realized I have to report every day. I have to get leases. I have to do this overhead. I have to be in a physical location, things like that. So, when I look at that and I think about the business I started is what a lot of our franchisees start, I think the way people should be thinking about it is what's a lifestyle I want, what business model suits it. So for me, kind of going back to your question, Brian, that was a big thought in my head is like, is this conducive for the lifestyle I'd like to build? And the eventual answer I got to is, yeah, I think it still can be, right? You just play by your own rules, set your own constraints, set your own parameters. So decided that, hey, let's give this a shot. Worst case, it doesn't work, and that's okay. But it just felt like a new adventure to try out. And that's why we decided to franchise and just grow from there.
So, what's the franchise look like now in terms of size? How many cities are you in, or how many franchises are part of your group?
Yeah, we have almost 30 locations now.
Okay.
So it's fully remote. I mean, the franchisees typically live in the city they're in, but they don't need vehicles, wraps, overhead equipment, nothing like that. It's a pretty lean model, but the same model I started, just way better. The
Yeah.
franchise system is built based off of like, how do I get people the same results as I did, but in half the time with less headache. That's the reason the system exists. So we have a pretty high density, oddly in Florida, not oddly because it has 30% of the nation's vacation rentals in one state. So it makes
Mhm.
sense.
It does make sense.
So yeah, we have a lot of locations there and kind of spread across the US and just growing. We actually had our first or our second live conference last weekend. which is cool because you have like a remote business and everyone's kind of doing their own thing behind a computer and you get everyone together. So we got everyone
Hmm.
together in Dallas and did workshops like, live speakers. Everyone got headshots done. It was awesome, man. So,
Oh, that's
uh,
fun. That's
yeah.
awesome. Okay, so what you mentioned overhead, so I'd love to talk a little bit of business math just to show our audience kind of what this type of business looks like, whether you're starting it from the ground up or you're part of
hmm
part of the franchise. You mentioned overhead and that it's very lean. So you don't need to have, do you rely on your subcontractors? Is everybody that does the actual work, are they still all subcontractors? Do they not need a branded vehicle? Do you not need to buy the supplies? What does that all look like in terms of overhead?
There's a couple ways of doing it. One's the employee model, one's the contractor model. I would say most franchisees are doing the contractor model. We do have a couple who are doing the employee model. It depends on their state labor laws. Regardless, the operations are kind of the same. The cleaners go from their home to the job site. Whether they're using their own vehicle and you're reimbursing them, or whether you're simply paying them per job, that depends on how you classify them. But generally, the operations are the same. It's just kind of a classification thing on the back end, plus some caveats on what you can and can't do. So, Brian, back to your question of how it works. Was that your question?
Yeah, I was just curious, like what the overhead looks like for a single location. I guess on a monthly basis. If you're
Yeah.
not paying for cars outside of reimbursing, so it sounds like they're mostly subcontractors. They're responsible for their own transportation. Do they also have their own cleaning supplies? Do you have standards of what supplies each contractor needs to be outfitted with? Do you have to pay for those? What is that?
Yeah. Good questions all around. So, in terms of the contractors, they would bring their own vehicle and their own supplies. Most of them are somewhat experienced cleaners already. They know what they need to bring. Typically, you're not doing things like commercial spaces, which might require like floor polish and heavy machinery and things like that, right? It's residential cleaning. So it's relatively lightweight equipment. So cleaners would bring their own equipment, their own vehicle, and go to the job. Typically, we pay them per job. So it's a negotiated rate with them to make sure they're happy, and it's a pay per job. That way, our margins are secure as well as the cleaners get paid what they want. The mistake I see a lot of people making, and I made this mistake earlier on, so I make sure my franchisees don't make this mistake, is two main things in this model. A lot of businesses I see charge the customer flat rate, but then pay the cleaner hourly. Incentives are misaligned, and that's where margins get screwed up the most. I made this big mistake earlier on too. The other part would be paying too high of a percent out to the contractors, right? Maybe your prices are too low, and so you're paying way too much. At the beginning, I was paying like 60 to 65% out to cleaners because I didn't know better. Now, typically, we recommend anywhere between 45 and 55%, just depending where you're at and cost of labor in your market.
That's pretty good margin, it seems like, for the cleaners if they're making nearly 50% of the revenue.
Yeah, I mean, it ends up being pretty sizable. Like most cleaners, I'd say on average, it ends up being around $24, $25 per hour. If you back math it, depends on location, right? Omaha versus Los Angeles, right? Probably going to be a little bit
Right.
different. But most time on the contractor basis, that's about the amount that we're seeing.
So you mentioned that one of the mistakes you made was you were charging a flat rate to the customer, so you had a flat rate
Mhm.
revenue, but you were paying your people hourly. Why was that such a big mistake?
So when it comes to any people intensive business and people management, ideally you want incentives to be aligned, right? Just so you don't have to worry about things. For me, simplicity is the best when it comes to this model. So let's say you charge a customer a certain amount. Ideally, you as the owner, you want the cleaner to get in and out as fast as possible if you're paying hourly. The cleaner's incentive is to take the longest there so they get
Hmm.
paid the most, right? So incentives are now misaligned. This often causes friction. It causes you to have to talk to the cleaners and provide guidelines and things like that. And when I tried it, it was a constant battle, right? Because if they'd go quick, maybe the customer would get unhappy. So you have to find that perfect happy medium in between. It was just really tough. So what I found in business in general is if you can make incentives aligned across the board from the top down, it makes life so much easier. So now that we could just tell cleaners, hey, you get paid this amount of money that you've told us you want to get paid. If it takes you a little bit more time or a little bit less time, it's still the same rate. Some jobs might take you a little bit more. Some jobs might take you a little bit less, but at the end, it kind of evens out. And a lot of the cleaners have been with us for a long time, and we've had cleaners be with us for 7 years, 8 years. They know how it works. They have their book of recurring clients. They go to them. They don't want anyone else. That's typically where this goes, right? It's a very recurring revenue business model when you set it up correctly. And the goal is just to make sure everyone's incentives are aligned so you don't have to manage it and start getting that. I hate calling it passive income, but like income, which is easier to get, right? Because it's
Yeah.
just set it and forget it type of income.
So how do you guys actually bill out to clients then right now?
It's all credit card. Everything's virtual. So I'll tell you from the start to finish. So Brian, pretend you're a customer. You call me, or you see us online, whatever.
Hmm.
We hit a Google ad. You'll call us, and we'll consult you on your home, see what you need, match you up with the correct package. We get you booked into our software system. Once you're there, we'll match you up with a cleaner. You'll get a bunch of reminders, text blast, whatever, just about the job coming up. Cleaner comes, does a walkthrough with you, does the cleaning, does a walkthrough with you, make sure you're happy. Right after that, your credit card gets automatically charged and you get an invoice. If you sign up for a biweekly program, it'll automatically schedule a couple weeks from now. Typically, someone from my team who's around the world will call you and say, "Hey, Brian, like, how did everything go? Oh man, you had an issue. Hey, we have a 100% happiness guarantee for the first 24 hours. We'll send someone out there for a 2 hour reclean." If you're fully happy, we'll say, "Great. Hey, why don't you leave us a good Google review? We'd love it. We're a small business." And you develop it that way. That same process I outlined, you just do that multiple times a day, repeat it constantly. Over time, you're going to have a business which has a bunch of Google reviews, a bunch of recurring customers, and you've built yourself kind of a business that's built to last. That's the goal of what everyone's doing here.
For the Airbnb side, do you guys have kind of like, is it on demand or rapid response where, because if I own an Airbnb, I might have a guest that's there Monday and Tuesday, and then the next one's not there till Thursday. Maybe they stay till the next Thursday. Like they're kind of, uneven bookings, right?
Yeah.
So how does that work for you guys to stay on schedule with an Airbnb owner who I imagine they get it cleaned after every use? Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is cool because this is the ultimate cheat code and why it's awesome to be part of a franchise system. Honestly, when I was doing it, Airbnb customers would message us and they'd say, "I have a cleaning here. Oh, shoot, the customer extended or the guest canceled, whatever." Now our software system hooks into your Airbnb reservation calendar automatically. So what
Oh.
happens is if you're the host, anytime you have a guest checkout, it'll automatically schedule a cleaning with us, automatically assign a primary cleaner or a backup cleaner. After the cleaning's done, you're going to get an automatic checklist that has pictures, lets you know if you're running low on supplies, lets you know if you have damages with photos. And anytime a reservation cancels or gets rescheduled, it updates in our system automatically as well. So if you think about that from an Airbnb customer's perspective, they're used to working with flaky cleaners, individual cleaners, having to text cleaners. Most cleaning companies are not very tech savvy. We use automations, Zaps, AI, like all these different new age tools, which, for people nowadays, it's not new. But again, cleaning companies, 3-4 years behind the times minimum, right?
Hmm.
So when Airbnb hosts hear that, they just want an automated business. They don't want to deal with cleaners, right? If anyone here has hosted an Airbnb, you know how hard it is to get a reliable cleaner. So they're willing to pay premium for the automation, for that third party, which is us, to manage things in the middle. But yeah, that's how it works on the Airbnb side.
So you mentioned your software, and that sounds like one of your differentiating factors. Did you guys develop your own software? Is there an existing software out there that you guys use and just crush it with? What is your software? How does it work?
Yeah, it's so I didn't want to get into the software game. It's funny because every smart business owner I've ever met says like, "Do not get into the software. like,
Yeah.
unless it's your core business, do not get into the software.
Uh-huh.
Costs 10 times as much as you thought, and it's 10 times harder, is what I've heard." So, anyways, I realized earlier I'm not a developer. I don't want to be a developer. I just want to run this business. So we use third-party software, but we kind of retrofit it to our needs. What I mean by that is you could get third-party software, but most software we look at has something called an open API. Open API just means you could plug in different software so they could all talk to each other. So, for
Hmm.
example, we have one main software for bookings. We plug that into our marketing software, plug that into our scheduling software. So, kind of the plumbing we've created ourselves, but the actual core software is third party software that we use.
Okay, very cool. And that makes it so much easier for your customers to just be like, in, out, let me pay you, get the job done, problem solved.
Done.
Eliminates so many
Easy. It makes
issues.
it very sticky.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right. So, what does it look like these days as the franchisor? Does your operation, do you handle the marketing for your franchisees? Is there kind of like a 50-50 buy-in where you help them and guide them, but they have budget and leeway to make decisions on that? How does that work for Made This?
Yeah, my philosophy when it comes to franchisees is I want franchisees to be entrepreneurial, right? You didn't buy this just to have yourself another job, right? You probably hate your boss. That's why you're buying a franchise and getting
Yeah.
out of the game, right? So I know there's some franchises which dictate everything. We're not like that. There's certain things we do to help franchisees, things which I know are fundamental. So all franchisees pay a marketing package, and the marketing package covers things where we get group rates from certain vendors. So, for example, if you're trying to get SEO alone or get a marketing CRM or do X, Y, and Z, it probably costs you a lot more money because we centralize everything and we have group rates to negotiate with the vendors. That's why franchisees will pay us a certain amount, which I'll talk about soon, which goes out to the vendors. The fundamental things we cover for franchises would be anything tech and website related. For example, we just put 5 figures into a new website. Franchisees don't have to do a single thing. In there, it's optimized, gamified. We manage the pop-ups. We manage all the funnels on the back end. We do all the email campaigns for franchises. So about 4 newsletters per week sent to their audience for them. We handle all the SEO. SEO means getting your business ranked on Google, on the map, as well as like the normal search. We do that. It involves a bunch of like buzzwords like backlinks and like interpage linking, all that kind of stuff's done. We post on social media for franchises. So 3 times a week for Instagram and Facebook, daily for Google My Business. There's a bunch of other tools involved in that marketing package as well. So, like Brian, you're in the marketing game. You understand this.
Mhm.
That's a lot of foundational stuff you just got to do.
Yep.
However, there's another side of it, which is how do I get leads now? A lot of that stuff is really good, medium term, long term, just for good sustainability. But what franchisees themselves focus on are things like Google Ads, and we'll help them set it up. Thumbtack, community marketing, creating Airbnb host meetup groups, which a lot of our franchisees do. Things like that to get leads now as well. So it's very much of like we both work with each other. We take care of the foundational stuff, and they take care of the immediate leads need.
Okay. Is the majority of your franchisees business Airbnb, or is it like what I'm trying to hint at is, do you guys or have you ever focused on let's just literally be Airbnb cleaners versus also taking residential, or is it profitable in both areas? So keep them both.
Such a good question, because common wisdom will tell you focus on one niche. I guess when you're early, you want to do everything. But the truth
Hmm.
of business is it's better to be a specialist on one thing so you get known for that one thing. Now, when it comes to Airbnbs, what I realize though is all turnovers happen between 11 and 3 typically. There's a lot of dead period between 8 a.m., 8 to like 11, and then or after 3 p.m. That time is filled with residential cleanings. And the cool part is it adds a level of kind of sustainability. Airbnbs, depending on the season, depending on what's going on, depending if that Airbnb is running or not, you get bookings or you not get bookings. But when it comes to residential jobs, the beauty of it is you could have a cleaning every Tuesday that's recurring and that's predictable income coming in for you. That's booked. That's just straight up booked. With Airbnbs, it's higher volume, which is the beauty of it, but you're not really sure when it comes in. So we specialize in both. And Brian, I would say every market is a little bit different. For example, in Los Angeles, like funny enough, before COVID, we were probably 75% of revenue was Airbnbs. Now we're probably 70% of the revenue is residential.
Hmm.
So I think it just varies depending on the stage of business you're in. And what I mean by that is like, let's say some franchise locations, they're brand new. They're starting to get residential customers, but then they get one Airbnb customer who automatically adds 10 or 20 cleanings a month. As a percent of revenue, that's going to go up drastically. But then they might not get another Airbnb customer for a while. They start to build up their residential side as well. So there are a lot of factors, including location. Myrtle Beach, our location there is probably 80% Airbnbs, but Denver is probably 50-50. McKinney is probably more residential. So a lot of variance there, but my philosophy is diversify income streams, diversify customer bases to an extent, and stack that recurring revenue, right? Whatever way it comes.
With the recurring, does that mean, do you guys is this a subscription model where you can sign on for, 1, 2, 3, 4 cleanings a month for this price versus just one-off retail? Or like, do you guys have a subscription involved here?
Yeah, we do. So we typically do discounts for the recurring side. And a lot of it is just like pure psychology stuff. And dude, this is stuff I didn't know when I started, where I was like, oh yeah, first time cleaning this, and then you'll get 10% off or 5% off. And like, now I know all these upsells, downsells, tricks, which help a lot, right? So
Mhm.
typically we price the first cleaning pretty high for the first time deep cleaning. And then customers will get a massive discount for the second and for the ongoing recurring packages. We call it the Forever Clean program. And there's just like a lot of bells and whistles involved in that sales script. So we teach all franchisees the exact sales script. You price anchor and then you show the lower price and then you give them a discount for X number period. I've also found from data we have from across all locations, it's like 46% of the cancellations happen between the first and third cleaning,
Hmm.
which is crazy,
Yeah.
right? What that tells me though is if I could get a customer past the third cleaning, they stay a customer for a very long time. There's a big drop off in the first three cleanings. So then that helps our franchisees think about, okay, well, how do I just get them past the first three cleanings? Over customers, like do whatever you can with customer service, send them a brownie, check in on them, do personal care, anything, because we know with data, after the first three cleanings, you have a customer, not for life, but for a much longer period of time. So things like that help stack the recurring. If you just know these data points, know these upsells, downsells, psychological points, all these things which are kind of compounded by the community, right? Because we could all get the data together.
What does the average LTV look like in lifetime value for LTV? What does that look like for your average franchise?
Oh yeah. So there's one-time customers, which I almost think about as separate from the recurring customers. For the recurring customers, you're looking at probably at least $1,800 LTV, if not more, depending on the location. But at least $1,800 LTV. But more often than not, it's kind of going towards like I'd say 1,800 to 3,000 is probably about average when it comes to residential.
Okay, and what's the average cleaning invoice price point look like?
There's per location quite a bit, probably 200 ish, 180 to 200.
Okay. So
Yeah.
talking about pricing, so 180 to 200, how do you guys go about, like, if I'm just starting up this franchise, or you're going to give me the playbook and it's going to be in there, but what does it look like in terms of, okay, Neel, I'm all in here, I'm ready to go, but I have no idea what to charge people. Do you guys charge by square foot? Do you charge by amount of work that needs to be done? Or if they need their ceilings mopped, like, how do you do that?
Yeah. No, we have a pretty intricate pricing model. So literally week one of Made This University is how do you price? Right. Now I'll just even tell you in the audience how exactly to do it in case you want to start this yourself. The way of doing this, at least how we've structured it, is the first time cleaning is hourly. Why? Because you have no idea what you're getting into, right? The customer might really care about bathrooms, but doesn't care about the floors at all. Some customers want everything cleaned. Some customers only want some things cleaned. So you want to customize the service, but still make it a deep cleaning. That's the first cleaning. After that, they get on the flat rate forever clean maintenance package, right? Where less time, less things to clean, but it's generally an overall cleaning of the place. That's normally how we price. Now, there's certain checklist items which are like key. We know every customer is going to want bathrooms and kitchens done mostly. Some of them care more about floors. But it's interesting. You'll talk to some customers and they're like, I don't care about floors, but I really care about baseboards. And you're like, all right, like it's a little bit weird, but like if you want that done and that's what you value, that's how you keep the customer past three cleanings, right? You have to know what they actually care about. Because if you just clean things based off your own checklist, and they're like, you didn't really hit what I wanted to get hit. So it just doesn't do it.
Okay. So let's keep on the business math side of things here. What's the average yearly revenue, annual revenue for a location? And then what do the margins look like approximately on that?
Every location varies quite a bit because it depends on what stage of business you're in and if you're doing it full time or part time. So there's almost too many factors to give you a pure average. Like, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I'll tell you the different factors. How much are you investing in marketing, right? Are you doing community marketing, which doesn't cost many dollars, or are you doing more digital marketing, which does cost dollars? Are you doing this full time or part time? Because the truth is, the more hours you put in the business at the beginning, the faster it grows by a massive amount more. And also depends on how much time you have in the business. Normally, when I think about this model, like for those of you listening, you might not see like my hand movements over here, but the first year is what I call grind phase, right? It could be a year, it could be 6 months, could be 18 months, whatever. But like it takes a while to get through grind phase, which is $0 to $10,000 per month in revenue. Some people have gone there in 3 months, some people have gone there in 12 months. Like it just varies.
Mm-hmm.
But typically what I see is things start accelerating because of the recurring revenue model, but it takes time. So at the beginning, you don't have Google reviews. No one knows who you are. You have zero brand equity. You're building it from scratch. Now, of course, us as the franchisor, we're helping you with stuff. But a lot of it is, unfortunately, kind of a waiting game. As long as you're doing the right work and the model's proven, right? Not just by us, but by a million years of people cleaning stuff, it works. At some point, you'll get out of the grind phase. You'll have enough Google reviews. You have enough recurring customers. You know what you're doing, and things start accelerating. The factors which get you out of grind phase faster, in my opinion, is are you spending enough on marketing and do you have enough time in the business? If you don't spend enough on marketing and you don't have enough time in the business, that grind phase is going to last way longer. So, Brian, I think to your question of like revenue and sizes, things like that, it's tough to say per location because everyone's kind of at a different goal of why they started the business. I can tell you from my location, from 2019, we did around like 1.9. Now I think we're at like 1.3. So we actually decreased post COVID. A lot of our customers went out of business during COVID. And we kind of realized too that even though we decreased the revenue, the customers we are working with now, because we raised prices too, are way more high profit margin. So with even less revenue, we're hitting better margins than we did at a higher revenue.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to get it to the point where I probably work 2 to 5 hours a week in it. I have a general manager in a place, the team in a place who are crushing it. So that's kind of where we're at. It's like the 1.3 mark.
Okay. Well, and I think that's a great point to make because it's so easy to be like, oh, I own a $2 million business. I own an $80 million business. What's your profitability though? Because a $2 million business with 4% margins, probably not a very fun business, right? Like
Nope.
if your profitability isn't there, then it's what are you doing? So I know it's really easy for entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs to get carried away with, I want a 7-figure business. I want an 8-figure business. But I want a 7-figure profitability, or I want a high
There we go.
6-figure profitability. Even if my revenue is lower, but my profit is higher, you're winning. And I think that is a fantastic point you made there because it's way too easy to get carried away with top line. And, like so many of these huge tech companies, they got these massive top lines, but they have absolutely no profitability living off of startup dollars. I am not jealous of that at all.
No, revenue is for vanity and the profit is for sanity. That's the old phrase, and it's totally true.
There you go. There you go. I love it. So, what's the process? What's the buy-in to get it to be a franchisee with you? And on top of that, who are the ideal type of people that become franchisees under the Made This brand?
Yeah, like oddly, it's a lot of people who I think don't have a ton of business experience, right? And that's totally fine. I think the beauty of a franchise business is that it's almost a business on training wheels that could help you move a lot faster. And what I mean by that is like a lot of the stuff is solved. So all you got to focus on is leads. How do I get cleaners? How do I get customers? That's kind of it, right? And the rest of the stuff, you have a partner with you who's with you the whole way. It's kind of like, so Brian, earlier this year I did Everest Base Camp. So 9 days hike to Everest. You hire a Sherpa, right? You hire a
Wait.
guide.
Time out. Are we glazing there? You just hiked Everest?
Everest to base camp.
Oh,
So
okay. Still
the base camp.
pretty
You're still,
awesome.
yeah, it's still like 19,000
Okay.
feet up. So it was
Wow.
rough, man, but it was cool. I did it with my wife.
Awesome.
The way I think of the analogy of a franchise is when you start a business, let's say you're hiking Everest. If you want to do it alone, that's cool. Like you could probably get to Everest Base Camp at least, right? You're going to carry all your packs. You're going to have to get your own map, figure out where you're going. Or you hire a guide, you hire a Sherpa who's done it a million times. You hire a porter to help carry all your stuff. You still got to hike the mountain, but you have a lot more help and you have people who've done it. So the guy who's hired the Sherpa, the guy who's hired the porter is probably going to get there faster and avoid a lot of the traps. It's kind of the same with franchising versus DIY business. Oftentimes, is franchisors have done it before. You're the community of other people doing the exact same thing. There's coaches, there's community, there's accountability just to get you up the mountain a lot faster. So that's the way the franchise system's structured. So Brian, to your question of like cost of buy-in, the fee to get the current initial franchise fee is $39,000 to get in. Next year is probably going up to $49,000. And then there's of course like some ongoing fees as well, but that's the initial buy-in.
Okay. And is this, forgive me if I forget if you mentioned this earlier, but is it the ability for a franchisee to do this part-time and full-time? Or I imagine you highly recommend being full-time, but it sounds like this is also a part-time possibility as well, at least starting out.
Yeah, I'd say at least 50% of the franchisees are part-timers. Now, I
Okay.
will say all of their goals are to quit their job in the first year, right? It's funny, Brian, if you ask anyone, how much money do you need to quit your job? And anyone listening, just think about that. If I ask you, how much money do you need to quit your job per month? I guarantee you, most people are going to say $10,000 per month of revenue. It's crazy. It's like if you ask someone, pick a number between 0 and 10, everyone says 7.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone thinks they need $10,000 per month in income, I should say. The truth is, people, in my opinion, should look to what's called a freedom number. A freedom number is what is the amount of money coming in where your base level bills are covered. You're not saving a bunch. Maybe your lifestyle isn't as luxurious as it was before, but where do you feel like your bills are covered? That's the point where I recommend people making the jump. Why? Because if you look at my story, I struggled for a couple years. I didn't know what I was doing at all. I probably wasted so much money just from all these stupid mistakes I made and moved way slower. But finally, when I did make the jump, which took me longer than I was hoping, the business doubled and skyrocketed from there. Now, if I had like someone to just tell me what to do and I could have done that 1 year earlier, how much more money would I have made? Right? You know how much revenue we're making right now and how much profit roughly we're making. What if I did that a whole year earlier, right? How much more money would that be? So I think that's something for people to think about, both when like, do I work with a coach or a franchise, but also do I side hustle it or not? I think a side hustle is fine if you need to de-risk. However, side hustling forever, this is my opinion, it's not the way if you actually want to build a sustainable business. If you want to make a few thousand here and there, I think it's fine. But if you actually want to build something to last, I'd recommend making the jump sooner than later.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is, and having chatted with franchisors before, it's almost like you don't have to be, I guess, the quote unquote, the visionary or the ground up entrepreneur. You can be someone who maybe you're entrepreneurship adjacent, or you, like you said, you just want to buy your freedom, right? You want to be able
Hmm.
to live life far more on your terms than anybody else's. This sounds like a perfect opportunity to do that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I do think when it comes to choosing a franchise, a big part is choosing the franchisor well.
Hmm.
Like you have to align culturally with them. You have to analyze the support system. So my recommendation for anyone thinking about franchising, whether it's made this or something else, look at the franchisor. Don't just look at the numbers, because what's actually going to dictate your experience. And again, you're building a business that's a lifestyle business to support the type of lifestyle you want. Make sure you're getting into bed with people you like working with. It's just
Hmm.
life's too short not to work with people you like. So I'd say don't just look at the numbers, but the culture, the support system, who you'd be talking to every day. I think all of that plays a big part in this.
Okay, I love it. And then final question here. I want to talk about some of your travels real quick before we sign off.
Yeah.
Does a franchisee, do they have to live in the city that they buy, the region that they buy? Is that a requirement, or can I live in Cincinnati and buy the Omaha market?
It's interesting. I'm seeing different flavors of this across different franchisees. We have some franchisees who are doing it fully remote, where we have one guy in California who bought the franchise in Florida and is running it there. Typically, I see that work well if you're acquiring a location that's out of that grind phase. But if you're in the grind phase, I've found just from the data points and looking at franchisees, it's oftentimes easier if you're local, at least at the beginning. There's kind of an X factor of like meeting an Airbnb manager in person and getting those first three cleanings secured,
Hmm.
hosting an Airbnb host meetup group. Just like there's kind of some factor at the beginning to help you move faster if you're local. Over time, though, I would say it's less relevant to be local once your business starts scaling up. When things start moving and the snowball starts already going, a little bit less relevant.
Okay, and then at that point, you can also hire out local people if you don't live in that area. And this is probably why you said an established franchise being purchased. They probably have a general manager that lives in that town that handles the day to day that can be part of that type of stuff. Is that right?
I mean, truly, the beauty is like most people don't ever hire anyone locally. The
Oh,
cleaners who are
okay, interesting.
contractors are local, but most operations are done via phone, text, Slack, whatever, which can be done from wherever in the world. So most people hire global talent to service
Right.
a local location regardless.
That's right. Yours are in South America and Latin America, right? Okay.
Yep.
Very cool. Very cool. Awesome. Well, so at the onset, we mentioned that you traveled to 55 countries. That's wildly impressive. And coming from somebody who's been to like seven, maybe four, kind of a homebody, that's really awesome. So I want to ask you, if you had to rank your top three countries and or cities, where do you stand on that?
Oh man, such a good
I know,
question. Yeah.
that's a hard one.
By the way, my mind I recently find out that 50% of Americans don't even have a passport, which is
Really?
wild. Yeah.
That is crazy. We need some more
Yeah.
culture, people. Come on, get out
Yeah.
there.
I would say places there's like live or visit. My favorite city in the world is actually Cape Town, South Africa.
Interesting.
Incredible. It's like Los Angeles and San Diego combined, but like way cheaper and it's awesome. I lived in Budapest for a while, which was super neat and I loved it. And the last one I would also pick would be Patagonia in South America. My first trip I backpacked from Colombia at the top all the way to Patagonia. And just in Patagonia, it almost feels like heaven. I don't know, like paradise. Like everything is like the colors don't make sense. They shouldn't be together in nature. And you're hiking all day. And I don't even like hiking that much, but I was just like all day out in the wild, and it was just so cool. So Patagonia would be my third option.
Okay. And what was the top place for food or drink or both?
Ooh, Thailand by far.
Mm.
One of my favorite countries. Do you like Thai food, Brian?
I do. Yeah, we actually just got a
Yeah.
new Thai place right down the road from us. My wife and I have been there, and it's fantastic because they give you massive portions. So I've got lunch for like the
Mm,
next 3 days. And given in today's inflationary times, it's still only like $14 for this giant plate of amazing stir fry. Like I loved it.
that's yeah, the leftovers are
Yeah.
incredible too. But man, Thailand is one of my favorite places ever, and of course the food there, awesome. So
Okay.
definitely Thailand.
All right. All right. Perfect. Well, folks, you heard it here first. If you're looking for traveling advice, first and foremost, forget about the franchising. Just come to Neel for the traveling advice. No, I'm
Yeah,
just
I
kidding.
got you.
He's got you hooked up there too. But Neel, this has been awesome. I want to make sure that our listeners can connect with you and check you out. Or maybe some of our listeners out there have been struck with the bolt of Zeus here, the bolt of Neel, and are interested in possibly talking with you about franchising. What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in learning more about the franchise, just go to maidthisfranchise.com, MaidThis franchise.com. Also host a podcast called The Freedom Formula. So if you're like, let me learn a little bit more about Neel first or more about the system beforehand, just go check out the Freedom Formula podcast and you could hear more about it there.
Okay. Awesome. And then you're also on X, right?
Yep, I'm also on Twitter, Neel B. Parekh on Twitter. So I'm probably the most active on that. Trying
Okay.
LinkedIn, but not as active yet.
Okay. All right. Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, folks, make sure you reach out to Neel. He's clearly an awesome dude. He's got a heck of a business going. And for those of you that are maybe at the very beginning of your entrepreneurial journey or you're making considerations on what you should do as an entrepreneur, definitely check Neel out. Well, Neel, this was just amazing. Thank you so much for stopping by. It was a real pleasure.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me, man.
All right.